It happened in an instant. One moment, Emma was walking home, her headphones in, the evening air crisp against her skin. The next, chaos. A blinding flash of headlights, the deafening screech of brakes, the force of impact. Her body lifted off the ground, weightless for just a moment before crashing onto the pavement. Darkness swallowed everything. Somewhere people were screaming, tires skidded, a car door slammed, footsteps pounded against the pavement. A voice, frantic, desperate. "Is she breathing? Oh my God, is she breathing?" The world flickered in and out. Pain, sharp and unbearable, coursed through her limbs. Her lungs burned as she tried to take a breath, but nothing came. Then, suddenly, silence. Not just the absence of sound, something deeper. A silence that stretched beyond time itself. A silence that wasn't empty, but vast. Emma opened her eyes. The street was gone. The pain was gone. She was standing, but not on solid ground. It felt like she was floating, surrounded by a mist so thick it felt alive. She turned, searching for something, anything familiar. But there was only light, not just any light. It pulsed, breathed. It was warm, wrapping around her like invisible arms. She should have been afraid, but she wasn't. Then she heard it. A voice, not just any voice. A voice that filled every part of her. A voice that spoke not just to her ears, but to something deeper inside her. Her name, Emma. She turned, and the moment she saw him, every fiber of her being knew it was him. Jesus stood before her, clothed in light, radiating a presence that made every fear, every doubt, every pain vanish. His eyes, impossible to describe, like the sun and the stars and the ocean, all at once. She couldn't look away. Tears burned her eyes, but she wasn't crying, not in the way she used to. This was different. She felt complete, like nothing had ever been missing. "Come," he said. Without thinking, she stepped forward, and in an instant, everything around her shifted. The mist cleared. Suddenly, she was moving, fast, not walking, not flying, but being pulled, drawn forward by something unseen. She passed through a realm she couldn't understand, a place between places. And then, before her, something breathtaking. A city, but not like any city on Earth. Its towers stretched endlessly into the sky, yet they didn't cast shadows. They glowed. The very air hummed with something more real than anything she'd ever felt. Music, but not music. A song that existed before sound. A harmony that sang not to her ears, but to her soul. The feeling of peace was overwhelming. She never wanted to leave, but then something changed. The light dimmed slightly. Not darkness, not yet, but a shadow of something pressing against the edges of perfection. Jesus' expression shifted. His warmth was still there, but now there was something else. Something she had never expected to see. Sadness. "You have been brought here for a reason," he said. A reason. Something deep inside her stirred. A weight. A knowing that whatever was about to happen next, it mattered. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Jesus lifted his hand, and in the space between them, something appeared. Something that should not exist here. Visions, moving, shifting images. But they weren't random. They were intentional, and they were meant for her to see. Her heartbeat quickened. The first image, a house. Not just any house. A mansion. A grand estate, its walls lined with history. It looked familiar, yet distant, like something out of a dream. The second, a boy, alone, standing in the middle of a massive room. His eyes were unreadable, his face half-shadowed. Something about him sent a shiver down her spine. The third, books, old books, older than they should be. Words scrawled in faded ink. Names she didn't recognize, except one. Her breath caught in her throat. She knew that name. Everyone did. Baron Trump. Her knees weakened. She turned to Jesus, her mouth dry. "Why are you showing me this?" His eyes met hers. They held no malice, no anger, only truth. "Because you must tell them." A chill swept through her, a coldness that had nothing to do with fear, but with purpose. Something was coming, and she had been chosen to warn them. She could still hear the echoes of his words in her mind. "Because you must tell them." Emma's heart pounded against her chest as she stared at Jesus. Tell them what? What was she supposed to say? The weight of those words pressed down on her, heavier than anything she had ever known. The vision still hung in the air between them, shifting, flickering like a reel of forgotten memories. The mansion, the boy, the books, the name, Baron Trump. It made no sense. And yet, deep inside, something told her it made all the sense in the world. Jesus didn't speak right away. He let the images linger, let her feel the gravity of what she was seeing. Then, slowly, he raised his hand, and the visions changed. The mansion faded, replaced by something else. A gathering, a meeting held in secret. Men in dark suits sitting around a long table, their faces half lit by a single dim chandelier above them. Their lips moved, but no words came out. Still, Emma could feel what they were saying. A plan, a strategy unfolding, a future that had already been written but not yet revealed. Then, another image. The boy again, Baron. Older this time, standing on a balcony, looking down at a crowd. His expression unreadable. The people below chanted something, their voices rising in unison, but Emma couldn't hear what they were saying. She wanted to, she needed to. The vision shifted again, faster now, words flashing before her like pages of a book being turned by an unseen hand, old texts, worn leather bindings, strange symbols, prophecies written long ago, names that had been lost to time. And there, in the midst of it all, she saw something that made her entire body go cold. A passage, a warning, a name she had never seen before, but somehow, deep in her soul, she already knew it. The last president. The words burned into her vision, searing themselves into her memory. Emma's breath quickened. She turned to Jesus, her voice barely above a whisper. "What does it mean?" His face was solemn, his eyes full of something she couldn't quite understand. "It means," he said, "that the world is not what it seems." The light around them dimmed slightly. Not completely. Not enough to cast true darkness, but enough to feel the weight of the moment. Emma swallowed hard. She could still hear the silence of those men at the table, still feel the presence of the boy on the balcony, still see the ancient words flickering before her eyes. "But why me?" she asked. "Why are you showing me this?" Jesus took a step closer. His presence alone sent a wave of warmth through her, but it was not enough to quiet the storm raging inside her chest. "Because they will not see it coming," he said, "and they will not believe it when it does." Emma's hands trembled. She tried to make sense of it all, to put the pieces together, but nothing fit. "You must warn them," he continued. "You must tell them what you have seen." "But I don't even understand it," she admitted. "How can I tell them something I don't even—" Jesus raised his hand again, and for a brief moment, everything stopped. The visions vanished. The strange, shifting images disappeared into nothingness. The golden glow returned, warm and peaceful. But the silence that followed was deafening. Emma felt her chest tighten, and then he spoke again. "Because they are watching." Her body went rigid. The warmth in the air felt suddenly thinner, weaker, as though something unseen had drawn closer. She could feel it, the way you can feel someone standing behind you even before you turn around. The moment she thought about turning, Jesus placed a hand on her shoulder. "Do not look," he warned. Emma's breath hitched. What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jesus' gaze remained forward. "They have always been here," he said, waiting, planning, moving where no one sees. A chill ran down her spine. She didn't ask who they were. Somehow, she already knew. The world was shifting. The future had already been set in motion. And Baron Trump, he was part of it. Her mind reeled. The shadows at the edge of her vision flickered, as though something just beyond the golden glow was trying to push its way in. Jesus' grip on her shoulder tightened ever so slightly. "They cannot reach you here," he said, "but when you return, they will know that you have seen." The words sent a sharp jolt of fear through her. "When I return," she echoed. Jesus turned to her, and this time, for the first time, there was the faintest trace of a smile on his lips. Not a smile of amusement, but of reassurance, of certainty. "You are not done yet," he said. And with that, everything shattered. The light, the warmth, the visions. She felt herself being pulled, yanked backward through time and space, the golden glow around her blurred, dissolving into streaks of color. She gasped, reaching out, trying to stay, trying to hold on, but the force was too strong. Her body jerked. Her chest collapsed inward. And then, a sharp, burning gasp. Her eyes flew open. A blinding hospital light, the sound of beeping machines, the sterile smell of antiseptic, a nurse screaming for a doctor. She was back, but nothing would ever be the same. A sharp gasp tore through the sterile air. Emma's eyes flew open, her lungs filling with fire, as though she had been drowning and had just broken the surface. Her body convulsed, the machines around her beeping frantically, voices, shouts, movement. She wasn't in the light anymore. She wasn't floating. She wasn't with him. She was back. The fluorescent glow above her was cold, too bright, too artificial compared to the warmth she had just left. The weight of the hospital sheets pressed down on her, foreign and suffocating. A distant, rhythmic beeping punctuated the chaos of voices and rushing footsteps. She tried to sit up, but her body was weak, trembling. Her vision blurred. She could barely make out the silhouette of a nurse yelling something about stabilizing her vitals. Her head swam. Everything felt wrong. And then it hit her all at once. The accident, the screech of tires, the impact, the silence, and then him. The memories crashed over her like a wave. The visions, the warning, the feeling of something watching from the edges of the light. The name, Baron Trump. Her entire body went rigid. She could still hear Jesus' voice in her mind, still feel the weight of his words pressing against her chest. "They are watching." A shudder ran through her. She wasn't the same person who had walked home that evening. She had been somewhere else, somewhere beyond, and she had returned with something more than just a memory. She had returned with a message. But what did it mean? Her breath came in uneven gasps as she tried to process it all, but the moment she attempted to reach for the details, they felt like sand slipping through her fingers. Pieces of it remained, flashes of the visions, the burning certainty of the warning. But there was something else, something just out of reach. A presence. Something new she had seen. A shadow flickered at the edges of her mind, not a figure, not a person, but an awareness. Something subtle, but constant, something waiting. The heart monitor beside her beeped louder, faster. She clenched the hospital sheets, her breath shallow. She needed to tell someone. But who would believe her? Who would understand? A sharp knock at the door. Her head jerked up. A man in a white coat stood in the doorway, his eyes scanning the monitors before settling on her. He was older, maybe in his late 50s, his silver-rimmed glasses reflecting the light. "You're awake," he said, his voice measured. Emma swallowed, her throat dry. "How long was I?" She couldn't finish the question. The doctor glanced at his clipboard. "You were unconscious for almost 24 hours. The paramedics say you were without a heartbeat for nearly 3 minutes." Her stomach turned. 3 minutes. That was all? It had felt like days, lifetimes. "But then," the doctor continued, his eyes narrowing slightly, "you just came back." The way he said it, hesitant, almost skeptical, made her skin crawl. "Your injuries are minimal," he went on. "A few bruised ribs, a mild concussion. Frankly, given the nature of the accident, you should be in far worse condition." He was watching her closely now, as if trying to read her expression. Emma barely heard him. Her thoughts were elsewhere. The light, the visions, the warning. "You're lucky," the doctor added after a pause. Lucky. Her fingers curled into the sheets. This wasn't luck. This was something else. A faint, whispering thought wormed its way into her mind. What if she had stayed gone? What if she hadn't come back? A wave of dizziness washed over her, but before she could dwell on it, the doctor continued. "Your parents are in the waiting room," he said. "I'll let them know you're awake. Get some rest. You've been through a lot." He turned to leave, but then, just before stepping out, he hesitated. Slowly, he looked back at her, his expression unreadable. "You were saying something," he murmured. "Before you woke up?" Emma's breath caught. "What?" The doctor adjusted his glasses. "A name! You kept repeating it, over and over." A cold chill crept up her spine. She already knew what he was going to say. "Baron," the doctor said quietly. "Baron Trump." The words sent an electric shock through her veins. The doctor studied her, waiting for some kind of explanation, but Emma had none to give, because she didn't even understand it herself. She barely heard him as he turned and left the room. The second the door clicked shut behind him, she sucked in a shaky breath. What was happening? And then, why was his name the only thing she'd been able to say? And why did it feel like something already knew the answer? She needed to figure this out, fast. Because the longer she stayed in the dark, the stronger the feeling became. She wasn't alone, not anymore. The world felt different. Nothing looked the same, but nothing had changed. The streets, the sky, the people passing her by, it was all as it had always been. And yet, Emma could feel it. A shift, a crack in reality that no one else seemed to notice. It started small, whispers at the edge of her hearing, vanishing the second she turned. The static buzz of radios crackling to life as she passed. A flickering streetlight winking at her like an unspoken message. And then, the dreams. She hadn't slept properly since the accident. Every night, as soon as she closed her eyes, she was there again. Not in the hospital, not on the street where she had fallen, but in that place. The golden glow, the visions, him, and the name. It pulsed through her dreams, appearing in fragments. Old books, faded documents. A boy standing in a hallway that stretched too far, his silhouette flickering like a candle in the wind. Baron Trump. At first, she had tried to ignore it. It was just her brain trying to process the trauma. That's what everyone told her. But deep down, she knew. This was not just a dream. This was a message. And then, the messages started appearing in real life. She hadn't told anyone, not even her parents, about what had happened in that place between life and death. And yet, strangers, people she had never met before, began approaching her. It started online, an anonymous message in her inbox. "You're not the only one who saw." Her stomach had dropped. She clicked the profile. No picture, no posts, just a blank account with a single message. She typed back, "Who are you?" No answer. She tried to tell herself it was nothing, just a random troll. But then, it happened again. She was in a bookstore, absent-mindedly scanning the shelves, trying to distract herself from the gnawing sense of unease that had been following her for weeks. A book fell. She hadn't touched it, hadn't even been near it. But it tumbled from the shelf, landing at her feet with an eerie finality. The title sent her blood running cold. The Last President. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. The book was old. Faded pages, a worn cover, the name on it, Ingersoll Lockwood. She had never heard of it before, but something about it sent a jolt of recognition through her veins. Then a voice. "You should read that." She turned sharply. A man stood there, mid-50s, his coat too heavy for the weather. His face was calm, but his eyes, they weren't the eyes of a stranger. They were the eyes of someone who knew. Emma clutched the book. "Why?" The man exhaled slowly. "Because it's happening again." The words made her dizzy. She wanted to ask more. She wanted to demand answers. But before she could, the man turned and walked away, vanishing into the crowd. She never saw him again. That night she read the book cover to cover, and the further she got, the worse the feeling in her stomach became. It wasn't just fiction. It wasn't just some old story. It was a blueprint, a puzzle piece in a mystery stretching back further than anyone realized. And Baron Trump? His name was in it. Not just once. Not just a coincidence. But over and over again. Time looped. History repeating itself, patterns hidden in plain sight. Emma slammed the book shut. Her hands were shaking. She understood now. The warning wasn't about what was coming. It was about who. She had to tell someone. But who would believe her? And more importantly, who was already listening? That night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, a thought surfaced in her mind. Was this why she was sent back? Because someone, was about to change the world, and she was one of the only ones who knew. A sudden chill crept over her skin. Somewhere, beyond her window, beyond the stars, beyond the limits of time and space, something was watching, waiting, and this time there would be no going back.